just getting over throwing up. But I'm holding this my beans on toast, I'm holding down okay. In fact, I may recommend it as a seasick remedy.
I'm getting a lot of sleep, getting to rest up a lot. Not much else to do except rest up and watch water go by. I have the luxurious bunk here with attached room.
Kind of cold, getting colder by the moment. We're very close to crossing the Antarctic convergence zone. Which is the point where it really begins to get colder. It's affected by the ice pack. Still got about 700 kilometers to go. We've traveled about 400. So this time tomorrow we'll be about halfway.
I need here. I have some water to drink and a nice warm blankie to lay under and a nice pillow and only 3.5 more days to go.
This is really bad. Last night, I think my greatest vertical leap was 5 inches off the deck on that one swell. Just laying in this bed that you put me in, James. It's the worst bed in the whole boat. Other than that, I'm having a good time.
Ushuaia, southern Argentina. It's New Year's Day 2002, and a small vessel is moored alongside a pier normally meant for gleaming white cruise ships 50 times her size. This is the Braveheart, the New Zealand-based ship used during the ZL-9CI Dxpedition of 1999. Recovering from a 25-day journey across the Pacific and around Cape Horn, she is now being readied for a brand new expedition on what for her is a brand new side of the world. This adventure was born 3 years ago on Campbell Island when 3 members of that trip decided that the sub-Antarctic was worth a second look and the wild South Atlantic was definitely the place to go. But rather than push the Dxpedition envelope once again with new innovation and mightier equipment, they decided to do exactly the opposite. What evolved was a low-power, old-fashioned DX adventure with 12 good operators, 6 small radios, and 2 incredible destinations. This time there would be no websites, no pilots, and no big signals. The focus would be on the chase, not the results. And though every effort would be made to give out a new one, the low-power, simple antenna challenge would be a key part of the fun for both sides of the pileup. The plan is certainly ambitious. In December, the Braveheart would be repositioned from New Zealand across the Pacific and over to the tip of Argentina, where her owner and 2 of the expedition leaders would board. From here, she will proceed to the Falkland Islands for 10 days of provisioning before collecting the remaining 10 team members flying in from the UK. The ship will sail on January 12th for the South Sandwich Islands, where the team has a permit to land for 5 days. The next leg will take them up to South Georgia for another 12 days, and finally back to the Falklands and home. This is the first time the Braveheart has sailed anywhere outside of the Pacific Rim. And this quiet ride from Ushuaia down the Beagle Channel and out into the Atlantic will be the beginning of a new era for the adventurous Kiwi ship. Only about 3,500 people live in the Falklands, 1,000 being military personnel and the rest either residents of the capital Stanley or farmers in the outlying areas. These remote South Atlantic islands became front-page news worldwide exactly 20 years ago when Argentina snatched them from Britain, claiming them in the name of history as her own Islas Malvinas. After a 2-month-long war and thousands of casualties, the Falklands were snatched back and Argentina sent packing. Though the Falklands were the focal point of the conflict, the sparks that set off the fire began much further afield on South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Since the war, the Falklands have prospered. The cornerstone industry of farming is being replaced by newer sources of income, such as tourism and fishing. In fact, by 1991, revenue from fishery rights actually eliminated the need for British economic support. Despite the new prosperity, the well-kept capital of Stanley still looks and feels more like a quiet English seaside town than a fast-growing metropolis. And even though 20 years have passed, the scars of war are still visible and will undoubtedly take more time to heal. Finally, on 12th January, after almost 2 days of air travel, the team is complete for the month-long adventure ahead. Lying in a gentle crescent formation, the South Sandwich Group comprises 11 small islands stretching over 300 kilometers from north to south. It will take just under 6 days to reach the Dxpedition's destination, Southern Thule. And though severe storms and huge waves are the norm at this latitude, the furious 50s occasionally calm down long enough for everyone to enjoy the spectacle. This end of the South Sandwich chain is made up of 2 adjacent islands, Southern Thule and Cook. The chartered anchorage is found to be just too rough to allow a Zodiac landing, and the large bay in between the two islands is the only option. But this bay is actually an ancient volcanic crater, and entry requires careful navigation through a tight underwater ridge that can come within a metre of the boat's hull. The plan is to enter the bay and find a safe anchorage just offshore from the old Argentine base, which is the only safe place to camp.
026 degrees rip presents depths shoaling to 23 metres. The entrance passes over a ledge and between the reefs having significantly shoaler depths. There is no anchorage in Douglas Strait. Fuel Island protects it from the west. The reefs afford some protection from heavy seas. Right. So if we go 26 and keep what you got there 1 kilometre off there.
Even within the deep bay, Southern Thule does not present easy access by Zodiac, and a beach landing would have been too risky. Since the team's gear was relatively lightweight and broken down into small, waterproof loads, some clever scouting around the cliffs by Nigel and his son Matt found what seemed to be a better way onto the peninsula, where the old base used to stand. It would be possible, theoretically, to unload everything straight onto the cliff.
I got on just over here, walked around to the boom, had a look at it and back again, and the getting on and off is no hassles at all.
Well, that's great. I remember seeing that tripod there 10 years ago. And,
but we're going to put you on there with enough gear to get this tents going.
Sounds great. All right. That's really close. That's good access.
With a large rope wrapped around the rocks, the Zodiac makes a careful approach. Driven hard against the cliff, all it takes is for the expeditioner to grab a hold of the rope and climb onto the rock face. With a water temperature at 0.1 degrees Celsius and 10-foot swells against the rocks, one miscalculation in timing could turn this expedition into instant disaster. If smashing against the cliff doesn't kill you first, the icy water will finish you off in minutes from shock. Due to the severity of the climate, the plan is to stay only 4 days here before heading north again to the more accessible and pleasant South Georgia. Actually, the original plan was only South Georgia, but South Sandwich was added to the itinerary after careful planning and negotiation with the British government authorities. Everything is handed up one by one from the heaving Zodiac and onto the rock face for transport to the campsite, which is about half a mile west on the peninsula. Excluding fuel, the expedition's total weight load is estimated at less than 800 pounds, including radios, shelters, generators, and even personal gear. One must tread a little carefully in this large area of nesting penguins, as chin straps defend to the end against any and all intruders. This campsite sits on a flat piece of ground within the ruins of an old Argentine base. And though a large glaciated mountain stood between here and the eastern US, it still presented a respectable location. The team's landing permit lasts for only 5 days, 2 of which will be partly used for loading and unloading. The weather at Thule can change at a moment's notice, from sunshine to howling snowstorm. Erecting fast strike tents and simple antennas in bitter cold and horrible weather like this is extremely difficult, and it takes a full team effort to get even a basic campsite up and running. Declan, EI6FR, spent 2 long years negotiating the terms of this permit, fully aware of the British government's reluctance to allow access to these dangerous islands. But it was the team's lightweight gear and experienced track record which eventually won them over, especially with items like survival bags and polar-rated shelters all being part of the kit. One permit requirement, however, was not open to negotiation. That of an experienced Antarctic support ship required to stay offshore at all times. Without this guarantee, no permit would have been issued. Using only 4 small Kenwood TS50s, the team's plan is to put as many QSOs in the log before the permit runs out or the weather chases them off the island.
Charlie Alpha 5 and 9.
United America 0 Charlie Alpha, UA 0 Charlie Alpha 5959.
UA 0 Charlie Alpha, thank you. QRZ.
Victor Papa 8, Tango, Hotel Uniform.
Queen Tokyo 5-9.
Sierra Victoria, Queen Tokyo 5 and 9. Very nice signal here in Athens.
Sugar Victor 1, Queen Tokyo, Roger, QRZ.
When the Southern Ocean occasionally removes her foggy blanket, the views of southern Thule and neighbouring Cook Island can be simply breathtaking. Sharp glaciated cliffs, black volcanic coastlines, and an astounding amount of animal activity. Far enough north of the continent to be away from the intense cold, and far enough south to maintain freezing temperatures in summer, there are days when these twin islands can be described as 2 of the most beautiful in the world. Despite the extremity, southern Thule was one of the first islands in the South Sandwich chain to be discovered. Sailing aboard the HMS Resolution in search of the great southern continent, Captain James Cook and his crew sighted the island on January 30th, 1775. As this was the southernmost land ever discovered by man, Cook named the island Southern Thule in homage to the ancient Greek explorer Pytheas and his voyage north. Thule translates to the place where the world ends, and was the name Pytheas gave to the furthest land he ever reached. Indeed, for Cook, this too was the furthest land he would ever reach, and despite circumnavigating Antarctica and reaching as far south as 71 degrees, he would never lay eyes on a more southerly land. But it's also not hard to see why Cook describes Southern Thule as the worst place on the face of the earth. Hundreds of thousands of chin-strap penguins covering practically every non-glaciated patch of ground is an awesome sight to behold and smell. The stench generated by these aquatic birds can overcome even the toughest of sailors and sink a man's boots ankle deep in guano. In fact, the entire peninsula is covered meters deep by penguin excrement. Breathtaking indeed. Aside of the smell, the S9 QRM created by these penguins and the fierce wind outside reaches almost absurd levels, especially in the SSB tent.
Bravo Papa India 59.
Thank you. Oscar Hotel 2, Bravo Papa India 59.
Oscar Hotel 2, Bravo Papa India, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Canada again.
Germany 0, Japan Hotel Canada.
Germany 0, Japan Hotel Canada 59.
USL, thank you.
Thanks a lot, QRZ. Japan, Florida 59.
USL, Italy Kilo 4, Quebec, Japan, Florida 59 also.
Italy Kilo 4, Quebec, Japan, Florida, thank you.
And over in the CW tent, the noise problem only slightly better. This is all that's left of Argentina's old base. Constructed by the Navy in 1976 as a scientific station, Corbeta, Uruguay was Argentina's first real challenge to a British South Atlantic claim not covered under the Antarctic Treaty Zone, and a first step to war. Southern Thule sits at 59 degrees 20 minutes south latitude, barely 40 miles outside that all-important United Nations frontier. At 60 degrees and above, signatories to the treaty agree to allow peaceful scientific access to all nations and freeze any territorial claims. In April 1982, Argentina invaded the Falklands, and Mrs. Thatcher decided that all non-treaty zone British South Atlantic territory was to be recaptured by force, including Southern Thule.
After the recapture of the South Sandwich Islands today by British troops, all the Falklands dependencies are now back in British hands.
For several years before Britain realised that they were there, no action was taken at the time other than to lodge a series of diplomatic protests.
The staff in the weather station this morning cut their last radio link with Argentina after destroying most of the codes and communication systems last night.
Thatcher said Britain wanted the surrender of Argentines, not only in the Falklands, but also of any left on the dependencies. hence this morning's action on the freezing wastes of Thule Island.
Codenamed Operation Keyhole, a team of British Royal Marines was dispatched to close down the base, which London had long suspected of being a staging point for the Argentine Navy. Despite the sub-zero temperatures and very dangerous flying conditions for their helicopter escorts, 10 people were arrested, 9 military and 1 civilian, but not before most of the base's documents, radios and scientific equipment had been destroyed, making it impossible to prove any of London's suspicions. With the signing of the surrender documents and the raising of the Union Jack over Thule, Britain's war with Argentina had come to a close. The base was sealed and the task force ordered back home. Barely 6 months later, Mrs. Thatcher dispatched a team to destroy everything on the peninsula except one small survival hut. The massive explosions laid ruin to just about everything, reducing Corbeta, Uruguay into a junk heap. Aside of the innumerable chin straps, midsummer brings all sorts of other breeding penguin species to these shores. Along with gentoo and chin straps, the fast and fearless Adelie penguin also comes here to breed, and in late January can be seen racing through the much slower colonies with younger ones in hot pursuit. These chicks were born in December and in another week or two will be leaving their parents' dependency and heading out to sea to feed on krill. Unfortunately for the Dxpedition, the VP8THU tents were unknowingly erected right in the middle of a favourite spot for Adelie penguin chicks, and a bit of a war erupted. 4 days and 2 beak holes later, the penguins declared victory. Midsummer also brings a steady stream of icebergs past southern Thule, which drift along eastward, almost imperceptibly, through the Southern Ocean to their eventual doom in warmer waters.
Victor Papa 8 Tango Hotel Uniform, listing 200-210. Japan Hotel 7, Italy Alpha Japan, 5 and 9.
Roger, Victor Juliet Hotel 7, India, America, Japan, also 5 and 9, thank you.
USL, thank you. QRZ.
Whiskey Alpha 4 Tango, India.
That'll be A4TII, 5 and 9.
5 9, thank you.
Thank you. QRZ. Victor Kilo 4 Lima Juliet, 5 and 9. VK4 Lima Charlie, 5 and 9. Roger QSL. QRZ up. OH1XX 5 and 9. Thank you. QRZ. ZL1 Alpha Victor 5 and 9. Thank you. QRZ.
You're right.
Still work.
The high-band antennas from 10 through 20 meters are nothing more than simple vertical dipoles situated on the cliff's edge. Force 12 SVDAs without the parasitic element. 30 and 40 meters are standard quarter-wave verticals with 2 elevated radials each. Operation on 80 and 160 was ruled out before arrival due to the short stay and the island's unpredictable weather. Using directional antennas like Yagi's would have been a hindrance due to overlapping openings and large beam heading differences to all major areas of the world. Though the VP8THU signals on the other end of the pile-up are often weak, no area of the world seemed too difficult to work. A point well proven by strong signals heard from the US West Coast, which everyone thought would be the toughest to work. Even QRPers had no trouble. The Braveheart crew anchored the ship only a few hundred meters offshore, which, weather permitting, meant daily hot meals and extra fuel for the generators. Even though she looks quite securely moored, the Braveheart had a difficult time holding her position at anchor. Official charts of southern Thule state that no anchorage exists inside the bay due to the rather extreme depth. But the Braveheart is relatively compact, and the crew realized they could instead creep in closer to the shore and lay most of their anchor chain against the steep underwater slope. This rather clever way of anchoring in an unanchorable harbour required an alert 24-hour watch. Even the slightest turn in wind or current had her dragging anchor and adrift. A bank of 4 closely spaced tents makes up the VP8THU campsite. 1 each for phone and CW, 1 for food and storage, and the 4th as a place to sleep. These tents were second only in expense to the ship charter and have extreme wind survival ratings. But while they held up extremely well to the wind, their waterproofing left something to be desired. Whether it was a manufacturer's defect or the fact that they are primarily designed for the drier polar latitudes, these tents quickly became a wet, muddy mess inside, with leakage at the seams and floor. Life becomes more bearable behind a pile-up rather than trying to deal with the complexities of camp survival.
It's contrast. You can be freezing cold and clean, or you can be moderately warm and very mucky and filthy.
And how do I feel? I feel muddy and cold. Cold, that sums it up.
It looks like beef-flavored noodles. It says fantastic. Any warm food is fantastic as far as I'm concerned.
I guess we're kind of in a tough temperature range because it's not so cold that the ground with all the penguin goo and other debris that we have to walk through is not frozen. If it were a little bit colder, that situation would be better. Instead, it's just on that borderline where this stuff is frozen at night, but in the morning it starts thawing out, and we've just got our boots just covered with this stuff. And every tent that we go in and out of, except for this particular tent, we have to struggle with slipping off our boots and then struggle to put the boots back on and everything. But we planned for that, but I think probably it's fair to say that it's a little bit worse than we thought it would be.
Rather frustrating place to stay for more than 4 or 5 days, I guess. We hang on here for 4 days, but if we have to stay any longer, I don't think we would survive much longer here.
Well, I tell you, when I talked to my parole officer, I had no idea that he meant this, okay?
The first Dxpedition to the South Sandwich Islands was in December 1955, when 3 Argentines spent 1 month on southern Thule. Dropped off by a Navy icebreaker, the 3 hams, 2 civilians and 1 Navy lieutenant, became the first recorded human residents of South Sandwich and were significant to Argentina's claim over the islands. Though their tents blew away in a severe storm midway through the trip and a large volcanic eruption on neighbouring Cook Island forced a frantic evacuation into a survival hut, this courageous effort, sponsored by the Radio Club of Argentina, netted almost 2,000 QSOs, almost half of which were W6s. The second time signals were heard from South Sandwich was during the 4 years from 1979 to 1982, when a club station at the Argentine base was operational using the call LU3ZY. Though QSLs from these operations were accepted for DXCC, questions have been raised as to the validity of these 2 operations, especially with British protests against the Argentine intrusions. The most recent operation from South Sandwich took place over 2 weeks in 1992, using the call sign VP8SSI. Headed by DX Hall of Famer Tony DePreto, this impressive 8-person effort included many famous operators, such as OH2BH and K0IR. But like the 1955 operation, the team would suffer at the hands of Thule's despicable weather. Severe storms destroyed or damaged most of the team's tents, and once again forced a retreat into the Argentine survival hut until their ship returned. "10 years on, the old survival hut still stands, and the remnants of VP8SSI still linger on. A gap vertical and the distinctive Cushcraft A4S Tribander now lie sinking into the ground. For one member of both the SSI and today's team, this brings back old memories.
Why did I come back? I guess I came back because it was another adventure and because I probably don't have all my marbles. You know, nobody in his right mind would come back. I haven't been to Oklahoma once and I've been here twice. Now, does that make sense?
It makes sense. It's big fun.
I think so, yeah.
Departure day seems to come just in time. Mud and water leakage inside the tents is getting out of control, and a nasty storm has arrived. At 4:30 a.m. local time, all stations go QRT and a quick evacuation begins. 80 hours on the air has netted just over 27,000 QSOs, a number which means very little in the overall context of this trip. Now it's time to get off the island safely. "55-knot wind gusts and a large sea swell make conditions far more dangerous than the landing a few days earlier, and the team's light load plan is paying off. Gear is literally thrown into the Zodiac as fast as possible. Chairs, radios, garbage, everything. During the last 2 days, the crew managed to salvage an old section of radio tower from the Argentine base and anchor it into the rock face using rope and scrap iron. An absolutely brilliant idea that has made a difficult situation a little easier. Look carefully. Climbing down this makeshift ladder is all that separates you from a nice warm shower on board the ship. Just a few simple steps down, and then jump. Nothing taken on shore has escaped the horrible filth, and it will take many more hours to clean all items, including people.
Right here.
The last 5 days have gone by in a hazy blur of excitement and misery, and emotions have run the spectrum. Even with less gear, South Sandwich is no easy place to stage a Dxpedition, and there aren't many DXCC entities on Earth, be they nations, islands, reefs or rocks, that present a challenge that is quite so intense. Maybe Captain James Cook was right, and maybe he wasn't. It really doesn't matter now. It's time to leave, and South Georgia beckons.